equal level of brightness as close as I could get it, and all of them have their flashlights, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on. So we're going to kick things off with a pretty heavy start. We've got Temple Run 2, we're going to let that play and see what it does to the batteries. Now the way this test works is every 10 to 30 minutes I'll take a reading of the battery levels of these devices and then I'll update the scores below. Notice also, to keep the test fair, the Galaxy S8 Plus is not running in its full resolution. It's running in a 1080 by 2220, which is called Full HD+. Right, so first set of results are in, and rather concerningly after only 20 minutes, the iPhone 8 is on 88%. Now notice how the iPhone 8 has the smallest battery among all the phones, so that could be the explanatory factor here. Taking another reading 10 minutes on though, the iPhone 8 and iPhone 7 seem to be on complete parity. So what seems to be happening here is that slightly smaller battery in the iPhone 8 is compensated by the more efficient A11 chip versus the iPhone 7's A10. Notice how a bit of a divide seems to be occurring here. We've got both Android handsets leading the pack, the iPhone 8 Plus somewhere in the middle, and then the two smaller iPhones really flagging behind. Now we're going to change tack a little bit. We're going to pull up some full screen video on all of these phones and test how much that drains the battery life. So this is going to be a pretty good test as to how efficient the displays are, as well as how well the batteries can cope with this. Leaving that for about 12 minutes, it doesn't seem to have too much of an effect on the S8 Plus or the OnePlus 5, but all of the iPhones seem to have had a pretty significant hit. Also, take a look at the iPhone 8, that has really pulled ahead of the iPhone 7 since our gaming test, and that does suggest that this new A11 chip, when it's in the background and not really working too hard, is a lot more efficient than last year's A10. So now we've pulled up Holo, which is an augmented reality application, to see how well these phones cope with just being used by apps. And I have to say, this is one of the most demanding ones, and you can see it takes a lot out of all of the smartphones. But at 76% after just about an hour and a half of this intense testing, the OnePlus 5 is really starting to show its lead. What I'm trying to do on this test is to create something that somewhat resembles how a person might actually use their phone on a day-to-day basis. So before we take any further reading, we're going to jump straight into the front cameras of the devices and leave them for a bit. After our next reading, it is good to see the iPhone 8 has really pulled well ahead of the iPhone 7. And quite concerningly, the iPhone 7 has already hit the below 20% mark. We're going to do one final round of gaming before we switch to something completely different. And it does seem, after taking the next reading, that the iPhones are almost accelerating downwards, i.e. as their figure has gotten closer and closer to zero, the speed at which it's going down has also increased. Next up, we're going to flick over to downloading. So on all of these smartphones, we're going to download some really large files and applications and see how much the background usage of the CPU and display actually are. And after about 10 minutes of this, none of these phones have lost more than 4%, so to be honest, we should probably move on. Now after changing to an Antutu benchmark, the iPhone 7 dies almost imminently, with a final time of 3 hours and 2 minutes. Now notice also how the two remaining iPhones try to dim their displays. It is a mechanism created to prevent them overheating, so every now and again I had to manually turn them up again. I have to say here, I'm pretty impressed with the Galaxy S8 Plus and the OnePlus 5. After this much testing, they are retaining over double of the charge of the iPhone 8 Plus, which is kind of meant to be a slightly more battery-oriented phone. The OnePlus 5's quite significant lead over the S8 Plus now is quite surprising. Even though the phone does have slightly fewer pixels to push than the S8 Plus, it does also have a smaller battery. But to be honest, even in past battery drain tests I've done, this is a result to be expected. The OnePlus 5 consistently retains its battery life very well. And then at 3 hours 22, 20 minutes after the original iPhone 7, the iPhone 8 calls it a day. One interesting thing to notice here is that even though the iPhone 8 Plus's battery is a good 30% larger than that of the iPhone 8, it is nowhere near doing 30% better. And after just 3 hours 37, the iPhone 8 Plus packs its bags and goes home too. Now very quickly before we get to the final results, we are working extremely hard to get to 1 million subscribers on this channel. We're uploading a tech video every single day, so if you could support me by subscribing, that would mean so much. So right at the bottom we have the iPhone 7 with a time of 3 hours and 2 minutes. Now slightly better than that, but to be honest not as much as we would have liked, the iPhone 8 scored 3 hours and 22 minutes. This was then followed pretty shortly by the 8 Plus at 3 hours and 37. We then continued our gaming session on the two Android phones, and the S8 Plus bottled at 4 hours and 16 minutes, and the OnePlus 5 was sitting pretty with 4 hours and 28.